The moment the floor of the Sunken Bell cracks open, I do something insane. I jump toward it instead of away from it. 300 people are screaming behind me. The strongest students in the kingdom are turning their new powers on a monster made of black water and bone, and every single one of them is losing. And me, the boy they just spent an hour humiliating on that same stage. I'm running straight at the one place everyone else is running from. 20 minutes earlier, I was nothing. A joke. The delusional Ashveil boy who talks to the ocean. Now the ocean is answering, and nobody knows what that means yet. Not even me. Chandeliers are falling. A stepbrother who spent 6 years telling me I'm nothing is fighting for his life 10 feet away. And the one creature nobody in this kingdom believes exists is about to prove every single one of them wrong. But they're about to find out. My name is Dorian Ashveil, and for 11 years, everyone I know has told me the same thing. The voice under the water isn't real. I was 6 when the merchant ship my mother and I were on broke apart in a storm off the Solmere coast. I remember cold. I remember losing her hand in the dark. And I remember something enormous singing beneath me, holding me up for 2 days until a fishing crew found me half drowned and alone, the only survivor. My mother's body was never recovered. Mine came back changed. The fishing crew that pulled me out of the water swore, for years afterward, that they'd heard something singing back at them from underneath the boat the whole way to shore. Nobody believed them either. I was placed with my mother's cousin first, a stiff, nervous woman who flinched every time I mentioned the voice, and who eventually decided a traumatized orphan with a dead mother's fortune attached to him was better handled by lawyers than by family. That's how I ended up in Ambrose Thorne's house at age 7, not chosen, inherited, along with money he had no intention of sharing with an unstable stepson. The first specialist diagnosed me with shock. The second called it grief hallucination. The third recommended I simply stop repeating the story, for my own good, and Ambrose agreed so fast it felt like relief. By age 11, the other students had a nickname for me, Ocean Boy, usually shouted across the courtyard right before something got thrown at my head. Garrick started it. Garrick finished it too, every single time, standing close enough to make sure everyone knew whose approval mattered. I stopped correcting people by 12. It was easier than explaining, again, that the ocean had never once said anything cruel to me. Only the people standing on dry land ever managed that. I told people about the singing. I told them for years. I described the shape moving under the waves, the weight of something ancient watching me from the deep. Doctors called it trauma. My new family called it an embarrassment. The other students at the Lhasa Academy call it exactly what it sounds like. Delusional. Solmere doesn't just celebrate strength, it runs on it. Every noble house's political weight is measured by how many tide-born children it produces. And a NULL result doesn't just embarrass a family, it quietly erases its standing overnight. Marriages get cancelled, inheritances get restructured. I understood exactly what a NULL reading would cost Ambrose the moment I saw his face in the crowd, and I understood that he'd already started planning around it before I even left the stage. My mother's shipping fortune was the only reason he'd bothered adopting a stranger's traumatized son in the first place. A NULL heir was a liability he could quietly manage. A monster wearing my face was never part of the calculation. There's a locked door on the 3rd floor of the Thorne estate that used to be my mother's study before Ambrose converted the rest of her wing into guest quarters. He never touched that one room. I used to think it was sentiment. I know better now. Once, when I was 9, I picked the lock and found a portrait of her I'd never seen anywhere else. Younger, standing on a ship's deck I didn't recognize, wearing a crest that wasn't the Ashveil shipping seal at all. Ambrose found me in there 20 minutes later. He didn't yell, he just had the room relocked the next morning with a key I never saw again, and told me, very calmly, that some things about my mother weren't mine to know yet. Here's the part nobody explains to outsiders. In the kingdom of Solmere, power isn't trained, it's given. Once a year, every first-year noble child stands inside the Sunken Bell, an amphitheater built directly over a sealed rift into the drowned deep, and the sea decides if you're worth answering. If something down there responds to you, it becomes your echo, a bonded spirit that fights beside you for life. Most students bond with something small, a current wolf, a tide hawk, a shard of living coral. The strongest bloodlines bond with legends, and the ones the sea ignores completely walk off that stage with nothing, forever marked as ordinary in a kingdom that worships the extraordinary. I was supposed to be one of the ignored ones. That would have been fine. Humiliating, but survivable. What actually happened was worse. 3 weeks ago, I stood at the edge of the bell, with 400 people watching, including the stepfather who only adopted me to keep my dead mother's shipping fortune inside his family name. Lord Ambrose Thorne didn't come to support me. He came to watch me fail in public, so nobody could accuse him of hiding an embarrassment. Next to him stood his real son, golden hair, perfect posture, already bonded to a full-grown storm drake at 14. Garrick Thorne has spent 6 years finding new ways to remind me I don't belong in his family, his school, or his bloodline. Try not to cry when it says nothing, he told me before I walked up. Actually, do cry. It'll be funnier. Before my name was called, I watched 6 other first years go up ahead of me. A Tidehawk answered for the Voss girl, small and quick, and her family cheered like she'd been crowned. A boy from House Calder bonded with a current wolf pack, 3 shapes circling his ankles at once, and the crowd murmured with real respect. Then Garrick went up, and the sea answered before the callmaster even finished reading his name. A full-grown storm drake breaking the surface in a crash of white foam, wings already spread, like it had been waiting specifically for him. The noble tear erupted. Ambrose actually smiled, an expression I'd seen maybe 3 times in 6 years, and none of them for me. Celine, seated 3 tiers back in the scholarship section, was the only person in that entire amphitheater not looking at Garrick. She was staring at the water instead, brow furrowed, like she'd noticed something nobody else had thought to check. By the time the callmaster reached the Ashveil name, the whole amphitheater had gone quiet, in the specific way crowds go quiet right before they expect to laugh. I stepped onto the ringing platform anyway. The callmaster read my name. The water below the bell went still, the way it does for everyone, waiting to respond. For me, it didn't just stay still. It went completely, unnaturally silent. No ripple, no reaction, nothing at all, like the sea itself refused to even look at me. The result flashed above the platform in cold blue light. Echo. NULL. Not weak, not small. NULL. A result so rare the callmaster had to check the ledger to confirm it had ever happened before. The laughter started before I even left the stage. Should have known, Garrick said, loud enough for the whole tier to hear. The ocean doesn't talk to broken little liars. I kept my face flat. I've had 6 years of practice. But standing there, humiliated in front of everyone who's ever doubted me, I heard it. Just once. Just a whisper under the stone, under the water, under everything. Not words. A single low tone, like something enormous had just noticed me and gone quiet on purpose. I told myself I imagined it. I was wrong. The only person who didn't laugh that day was Celine Marrow, a scholarship student obsessed with pre-collapse sea myths. The kind of stories the noble houses pretend don't exist. She caught up to me afterward, ignoring the stares. NULL isn't a real result, she said. Not according to the old records. NULL means the bell couldn't classify what answered, not that nothing did. Nobody wants to hear that theory except you, I told her. That's usually how the truth works, she said, and walked off before I could argue. I didn't believe her, not really. Belief is expensive when you've been burned by it your whole life. The 3 weeks after the calling were the quietest 3 weeks of my life, and not in a good way. Ambrose stopped introducing me to house guests entirely. Where I used to get wheeled out for photographs and polite lies about late bloomers, I suddenly didn't exist at family functions at all. Staff started using the servant's stare instead of walking past my room. It's a specific kind of erasure, watching your own household quietly decide you're not worth explaining anymore. Garrick, at least, was consistent enough that I stopped expecting anything else. Finn was the only person who didn't change how he treated me, which either makes him the bravest person at Thalassa Academy or the least observant. And honestly, some days I wasn't sure which. You know NULL doesn't actually mean anything, right? He told me, 9 days after the calling. while helping me dodge a mandatory coping seminar Ambrose had arranged without asking me. It just means the system's dumb. The system decided my entire future in about 4 seconds, I said. I don't think dumb covers it. Sure it does, Finn said. Dumb things ruin lives all the time. Doesn't make them right. Twice that week, alone at the edge of the academy's training pool after curfew, I tried anyway, dipped my hand into still water and asked, quietly, stupidly, if anyone was listening. Nothing answered, no ripple, no whisper, nothing but my own reflection staring back like it pitied me. I told myself that settled it once and for all. It didn't, not even close, but I wouldn't understand why for 3 more weeks. Celine kept sending notes too, short, unsigned, slipped into my books between classes, each one a fragment of some old myth about the drowned deep, about bonds the bell couldn't measure, about a handful of names in 300-year-old records marked exactly the way I'd been marked. I didn't respond to any of them. I told myself I wasn't interested. I read every single one twice. Something else started happening too, something I didn't tell anyone, not even Finn. The voice under the water, the one I'd spent 11 years insisting was real, got louder. Not words, not yet, just presence, closer every night, like something on the other side of a very thin wall had started leaning against it. Twice, walking back from the library after dark, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the academy's seawall, robes dark, perfectly still, gone the moment I blinked. I told myself it was a groundskeeper. I told myself a lot of things that autumn. That same week, 3 fishing boats near the southern reef vanished without a trace, and the survivors who washed up 2 days later wouldn't say what they'd seen, only that singing had come from underneath the water, right before their nets started pulling toward the deep instead of up. The council blamed a rogue current a second time. Twice in 1 week felt like more than coincidence, even then, though I didn't have anywhere to put that feeling yet. Rumors about a masked order operating somewhere along the coast had circulated in Thalassa's lower years for as long as I'd been a student, half-believed stories about a choir that worshipped whatever the original ceiling had locked away, the kind of thing older students told to scare first years during exam season. I'd always assumed they were exactly that. Stories. 4 days before the feast, the tide pulled back from the Solmare coastline further than anyone could remember, stranding half the fishing fleet and leaving the exposed seabed littered with things that didn't belong there. Coral shaped like teeth, stone tablets covered in a script no scholar in the kingdom could read, dead things that had clearly been dead for centuries and shouldn't have surfaced intact. The council called it a freak current and moved on. Celine didn't. Her last note before the feast was longer than the others, hurried, ink smudged like she'd written it fast. It said only this: whatever answered you wasn't sleeping quietly. Something disturbed it. Be careful at the feast. I put that note in my pocket and forgot about it within the hour, because nothing at Thalassa Academy had ever actually happened to me before. That was my last night of believing that. Tonight was supposed to be the easy part, the Ascension Feast, where every bonded first year parades their new echo in front of the noble houses, and the unbonded, like me, are expected to stand at the back and clap. The bell had been transformed for the occasion. Banners from every noble house hung between chandeliers that hadn't been shattered yet, long tables of imported delicacies lining the outer ring, foreign delegations from 3 neighboring kingdoms seated in the honor box to witness Solmir's newest crop of tideborn. Ambrose had spent weeks talking about the alliance opportunities the feast represented. I'd spent weeks trying to figure out how to be invisible in a room specifically designed to celebrate everyone I wasn't. I found a spot near the back wall, close enough to the exits that nobody would notice me leave early, and watched Garrick work the room like he'd been born for exactly this. Stormdrake curled elegantly at his side, foreign dignitaries laughing at whatever charming nothing he was saying, Ambrose beaming like the whole evening had been arranged just to showcase his real son. Finn found me 20 minutes in, balancing 2 plates of food he'd clearly stolen from the noble tables. Figured you weren't going to eat otherwise, he said, handing one over. Also figured watching Garrick charm an entire delegation would go down easier with pastries. You know me well. 6 years of practice, he said, and for 1 second, just one, The evening felt almost normal. I was doing exactly that when the temperature in the Sunken Bell dropped fast enough to fog the air. The ceremonial water at the center of the platform, the same water that stayed silent for me 3 weeks ago, turned black in an instant, like ink dropped into glass. Chancellor Vesper Cray was mid-toast, goblet raised, praising the Thorn family's unmatched Tideborn legacy and the bright bonded future of this year's class, when the floor beneath the ceremonial pool split open with a sound like a bone snapping in half. Something climbed out of it, not an echo, not anything the bell had ever classified. A drowned warden, armor-plated, eyeless, easily 9 feet tall, dragging chains made of fused coral and human ribs, hauled itself onto the platform and let out a scream that cracked 3 chandeliers. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Then it grabbed the nearest noble child and pulled him toward the crack in the floor, and the entire feast turned into a stampede. Garrick's Stormdrake hit the warden first, lightning arcing off its claws, and the warden barely staggered. 6 more bonded students threw everything they had: fire, ice, blades of compressed water, and the thing kept walking forward like none of it mattered. That's when the second crack opened, then a third. More wardens climbed through, one after another, faster than the guards could organize a line. Somewhere above us, robed figures I didn't recognize stood calmly on the balcony tier, watching the chaos like an audience at a play they'd already read the ending to. One of them wore a mask shaped like a hollow, open throat. I didn't know it yet, but that was my first look at the hollow cantor, and the massacre unfolding below him wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. I grabbed Finn Oswick, my one actual friend at this school, and hauled him behind a collapsed pillar as a warden's chain smashed the space where we'd been standing half a second earlier. "This is insane. This is insane. This is..." Finn kept repeating it like a chant. A first year I recognized from the corridor, small, maybe 12, house colors I didn't know, was pinned under a fallen support beam 6 feet from us, screaming for anyone to help. I went. Of course I went. I didn't have an echo, didn't have a weapon, didn't have anything but 2 hands and a stupid amount of stubbornness, and I threw myself at that beam like sheer willpower had ever solved anything in my life. It didn't move. A warden's shadow fell over both of us half a second later. I grabbed a shard of broken chandelier glass off the floor and drove it into the thing's ankle joint, which did approximately nothing except make it look down at me with mild, monstrous curiosity, like I was an insect that had made an unusually bold decision. It swung a chain at my head anyway. I ducked, barely, felt it clip my shoulder hard enough to spin me into the rubble, pain exploding white behind my eyes. The kid under the beam was still screaming, the warden was still coming, and for 1 full humiliating second, lying in the wreckage with blood running down my arm, every voice that had ever called me delusional felt correct. Then a stray blast of lightning from somewhere across the hall caught the warden across the back, staggering it just long enough for me to drag the kid free by the collar and shove him toward a knot of fleeing students. I didn't see who threw it. I didn't have time to look. "Where's Celine?" I asked. That's when I saw her, 20 feet away, pinned between 2 wardens, her small ice hawk Echo already broken and dissolving into mist beside her. She wasn't running. She was staring straight at the black water, still pouring out of the crack, like she was trying to read something in it. A warden's claw came down toward her. And every excuse I'd ever made to myself, that the voice wasn't real, that I was broken, that hoping for anything more had only ever gotten me hurt, all of it went completely silent. I didn't think. I ran straight at the crack in the floor instead of away from it. And I screamed the one thing I'd never said out loud in front of another living person. "I know you're down there! I've always known! So answer me now, or she dies." The black water didn't ripple this time. It exploded upward, and the whole world went dark and cold and enormous. And somewhere underneath all of it, something ancient finally opened its eyes. The first thing I feel isn't fear. It's recognition. The exact same weight from the shipwreck 11 years ago, pressing against my chest like a hand I somehow still remember. A pillar of black water rises out of the crack, twisting upward past the balcony, past the shattered chandeliers, until it blots out the ceiling completely. Inside it, something massive uncoils. Plated scales the color of a starless sea, a jaw wide enough to swallow the warden closest to Celine whole, eyes like drowned lanterns fixing directly on me. Every warden in the room freezes at once. Finn's mouth is open, but nothing is coming out. That's not an echo, someone screams from the balcony. That's not possible. Nothing that size has answered a calling in 300 years. The creature, my creature apparently, though I have no idea what that word even means yet, lowers its head until we're eye to eye, and I hear the voice again. The one everyone told me for 11 years wasn't real. It says one word, low enough that I feel it in my teeth more than I hear it. Mine. I don't know if it means me, or the sea, or something else entirely. There's no time to ask. The warden holding Celine lunges anyway, either too stupid or too desperate to understand what just happened, and the Leviathan's tail moves before I even finish flinching, catching it mid-air and slamming it through the balcony railing hard enough to cave in stone. Celine scrambles backward, staring at me like I've just become a stranger wearing a familiar face. "NULL," she breathes. "It wasn't NULL. It was never NULL." "Explain that to me later," I tell her, because 6 more wardens are already turning toward us, and Chancellor Cray is screaming orders nobody can hear over the chaos. And somewhere above the wreckage, the hollow cantor is watching me, with a stillness that feels worse than every warden combined. He tilts his head, almost curious, and raises one hand toward the crack in the floor like he's conducting an orchestra. More black water answers him. Whatever this was supposed to be, it was never finished. This is only the opening move. And I'm standing in the middle of it with a Leviathan nobody can explain, a stepbrother who just watched everything he mocked me for turn real in front of 400 witnesses, and a masked stranger who looks less surprised by any of this than anyone else in the room. Garrick lands beside me, Stormdrake circling overhead, blood on his lip and disbelief all over his face. "What," he says, "is that?" "Apparently," I say, "the thing you told me wasn't real." He doesn't have a comeback for that. For the first time in 6 years, Garrick Thorne has absolutely nothing to say to me. The Leviathan's head swings toward the balcony, toward the masked figure still standing calm in the middle of a collapsing ballroom, and I feel something else through the bond. Not words this time, just a pull, sharp and immediate, like recognition. It knows him. Before I can figure out what that means, the hollow cantor raises his hand a second time, and the ceiling of the Sunken Bell begins to crack from the outside in, like something even bigger is waiting just beyond the stone. "Get everyone to the east stair," Celine shouts, already moving, dragging a stunned Finn with her. "Dorian, whatever that thing is, it's the only reason any of us are still breathing. Don't lose it now." I look up at the creature that answered a call I made 11 years too late, plated scales still steaming where warden blood hit them, one drowned lantern eye tilted down toward me, like it's waiting for a decision only I can make. "What do I call you?" I ask. Because somehow, in the middle of a massacre, that feels like the most important question in the world. The answer comes as pressure behind my eyes, an old name surfacing from somewhere that isn't quite memory and isn't quite dream. Vantheras. The ceiling gives way completely, and something far larger than any warden begins pulling itself up through the widening crack in the stone, and I understand, in the space of one heartbeat, that tonight isn't ending. It's only getting started. The thing coming through the ceiling isn't a warden. It's taller than the bell's outer wall, built like a drowned cathedral given claws, and the moment it fully emerges, every remaining warden in the room turns to face it and kneels. Vantheras goes rigid beside me. Through the bond, I feel something I've never felt from it before. Caution. "Celine!" I shout over the noise. What is that? She's already backing toward the stairs, face gone pale in a way that has nothing to do with fear of the wardens. "The old texts have a name for it," she calls back. "A devourer. They're not supposed to exist anymore. They were supposed to have been sealed with everything else down there 300 years ago." The hollow cantor's mask tilts toward me, and even without seeing a face behind it, I feel the smile. "Ashveil blood," he says, voice carrying easily across the wreckage, calm in a way that makes my skin crawl. 11 years, and it finally woke up right on schedule. Your mother would be so proud. The words hit harder than any warden could. What did you just say about my mother? That she made a choice on that ship, he says. One you were never supposed to remember making with her. Vantheras moves before I can process what that means, placing itself bodily between me and the devourer, as the massive creature lets out a sound that shatters every remaining window in the bell. Chancellor Cray finally finds his voice again, screaming for every remaining bonded student to fall back to the outer wall. But half of them are too busy staring at me and my Leviathan to move. Garrick grabs my shoulder, and for once there's no mockery in his grip. Whatever you're about to do, he says, do it fast. I look at Vantheras. I look at the devourer tearing through stone toward the center of the room, toward Celine, toward Finn, toward everyone who's ever called me delusional, and everyone who never once believed a word I said about the voice under the water. Then I look at the crack in the floor where all of this started, and I understand, with total clarity, exactly what I have to do next. We're not falling back, I say. Vantheras lowers its head, jaw opening wide enough to swallow the moon, and for the first time in 11 years, the voice under the water, and I want exactly the same thing. The devourer takes one step toward us that cracks the entire platform in half, and everyone still standing in the Sunken Bell finally understands what the hollow cantor already knew when he walked in tonight. This was never a massacre, it was a summons, and I just answered it. Vantheras hits the devourer first, and the collision sounds like two mountains colliding, throwing every remaining warden off its feet and cracking the last standing pillar clean in half. I go down hard, ears ringing, Celine's hand suddenly hauling me upright before I even register she's there. You're bonded, she says, fast, urgent, like she's trying to explain 3 years of forbidden research in 10 seconds. A real bond, not a small one. That's why the bell called it NULL. It wasn't equipped to measure something that size. Do you understand what that means? Not even a little, I admit. It means you're not what this kingdom thinks you are, she says. And that mask up there already knew it before tonight. The devourer recovers fast, faster than something that size has any right to, and swipes a claw the length of a ship's mast across the platform. Vantheras takes the hit to shield the collapsed section, where a dozen younger students are still trapped under debris, and I feel the impact through the bond like it landed on my own ribs. It's protecting them, Finn says, awestruck despite the chaos. It's actually protecting them. Garrick's Stormdrake dives in to help, lightning scoring along the devourer's flank, buying just enough time for the trapped students to scramble free. For one strange, suspended second, Garrick Thorne and I are fighting on the same side for the first time in our lives. Ashveil, he shouts. Tell your monster to actually hit it instead of just blocking. He has a name, I shout back, surprising myself with how much I mean it. Vantheras, use it. The hollow cantor watches all of this from the ruined balcony with the same infuriating calm, arms folded, like a man reviewing notes on an experiment going exactly as planned. When our eyes meet across the wreckage, he inclines his head slightly, almost respectfully. Your mother tried to run from this bond, he says, voice somehow cutting clean through the roar of battle. She thought drowning herself instead of you would end it. It didn't. It only delayed it. The floor tilts under me, and it has nothing to do with the fight. She didn't drown, I say. She was lost. There's a difference. Is there? He asks. Ask your new family sometime what really happened to the search reports. Ask them why your stepfather paid to have them sealed the same week he adopted you. Ambrose Thorne, half hidden behind a wall of palace guards near the east exit, goes very still. I don't have time to chase that thread, because the devourer's tail sweeps low and fast, aimed directly at the section of collapsed floor where Celine is still crouched helping the last trapped student climb free. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember running, throwing myself in front of her, and feeling Vantheras surge forward through the bond a half-second before impact, close enough that the tail catches its flank instead of us, sending us both sliding across shattered stone. Celine grabs my collar, hauling me back from the edge of the crack, breathing hard. That was either extremely brave or extremely stupid. With me, it's usually both, I say. The devourer roars again, And this time the sound carries actual words underneath it, garbled and ancient, directed at Vantheras like an accusation. Vantheras answers back the same way, not in any language I recognize, but I understand the shape of it anyway, straight through the bond. Traitor, the devourer seems to say. Free, Vantheras answers, and slams its full weight into the larger creature, driving it back toward the crack it climbed out of. The hollow cantor's calm finally cracks, just slightly, watching his monster get pushed backward by mine. Interesting, he says, almost to himself. It's stronger awake than we accounted for. Then a warden he hadn't bothered controlling breaks off from the kneeling group and lunges for the noble section instead, straight at the knot of council members still frozen near the east exit. Straight at Ambrose Thorne. For one full second, I actually consider not moving. The man spent 6 years making sure I knew exactly how little I mattered to his family. Some ugly, honest part of me wants to watch him find out what fear actually feels like, the way I've had to find out over and over again in his house. Vantheras moves before I finish the thought, which tells me something about which of us is actually the better person tonight. The Leviathan's tail catches the warden mid-lunge, close enough that Ambrose's ceremonial robes get soaked in black water, and he stumbles backward into his own guards, face gone the color of old parchment. He looks at me across the wreckage, not with gratitude, with something closer to fear, like he's only now understanding that the boy he spent 6 years dismissing just decided, without hesitation, that he was still worth saving. For a man who built his entire political career on careful calculations, that expression is the closest thing to genuine I've ever seen on his face. It doesn't last. By the time our eyes meet a second time, the mask is already sliding back into place, and I understand, with total clarity, that whatever gratitude he almost felt just got filed away next to everything else he's decided not to feel where I'm concerned. I don't get long to enjoy the moment. The first devourer uses the opening to slam Vantheras sideways into the bell's outer wall hard enough to crack the stone clean through, and for one terrible second, through the bond, I feel something that scares me more than anything else that's happened tonight. Pain, real pain, sharp and enormous, and underneath it, something close to doubt. Vantheras. It rights itself slowly, one massive wing fin dragging where the impact caught it. And for the first time since the water exploded upward, I understand this fight isn't guaranteed. Whatever Vantheras used to be 300 years ago, 3 weeks of a barely formed bond isn't the same as whatever it had before. The hollow cantor sees it too. There it is, he says, almost gently. The limit. Every bond has one, Ashveil. Yours is younger than my boots. I don't have a clever answer for that. I don't have anything except the crack in the floor, the 2 devourers, a wounded Leviathan, and a stepfather staring at me like I'm a stranger who just saved his life for reasons he can't begin to understand. Celine's voice cuts through the ringing in my ears. Dorian, the bond isn't about strength. It's about how much of yourself you're willing to give it. That's what the old records actually say. Not power, belief. Belief. The one thing I'd spent 11 years being told to stop having. I think of every specialist who told me the voice wasn't real. I think of Ambrose's relief the day I finally stopped talking about it. I think of 11 years spent quietly apologizing for something that turned out to be the realest thing I'd ever felt. The hollow cantor raises one hand, and the black water in the crack begins to churn violently, like something else, something bigger than even the devourer, is being called up from far below. Chancellor Cray finally reaches us, robes torn, face gray with shock, flanked by the last of the standing palace guard. Ashveil, he says, staring at Vantheras like it might vanish if he blinks too hard. What in the collapsed God's name have you been hiding? Nothing, I say. You just never once bothered to ask. Before he can answer, the water in the crack rises again, and this time, it isn't the devourer, it's a second one. Celine's face goes white. There's never been a recorded calling with 2 devourers. Not once. Not in 300 years of records. Then why is it happening now? I ask, even though some small, cold part of me already suspects the answer has less to do with luck, and everything to do with whatever the hollow cantor deliberately disturbed off the southern reef this week. There's a first time for everything, Finn offers weakly, which is exactly the wrong thing to say, and exactly the thing I needed to hear, because it makes me laugh once, sharp and a little unhinged, right before the second devourer tears fully free of the crack, and the entire ceiling collapses inward, around all of us at once. The second devourer lands between us and the east exit, cutting off the last clear path for the students Cray is trying to evacuate. And for the first time since the ceiling opened, I feel something from Vantheras that isn't caution or fury, it's worry, and it's aimed directly at me. It doesn't want to fight two of them at once, I say, half to Celine, half to myself, working it out as the bond translates the feeling into something close to language. It's scared of losing me in the process. That makes two of it, Celine mutters, already scanning the wreckage for another way out. Garrick lands hard beside us, Stormdrake bleeding from a claw mark along its wing, his usual arrogance completely stripped away. There's no clean path left, he says. Both exits are blocked. Whatever you're planning, Ashveil, now's the time. Behind us, Prefect Halden Voss, the only fifth year still standing, bonded to a full-grown sea serpent twice the size of Garrick's drake, throws himself between the second devourer and a knot of trapped first years, buying seconds with everything he has. It isn't enough. The devourer's claw catches his serpent across the throat, and the bond snaps in a burst of light and static that drops Halden to his knees, screaming, the echo dissolving into mist before it can even finish dying. Get him out, I shout at Finn, who's already moving, dragging the prefect's dead weight back toward the wall with a strength I didn't know he had. Watching a 5-year bond die in front of me, watching someone who trained his whole life for this collapse in seconds against something that shouldn't exist, does something to the fear in my chest. It doesn't erase it. It just makes doing nothing feel a lot more dangerous than doing something reckless. I look at the two devourers, converging from opposite sides, at the trapped students still pinned under debris near the collapsed east stair, at the hollow cantor watching from above with the patience of a man who has already seen every version of how tonight ends. Then I look at Vantheras, plated flank steaming, jaw still dripping black water, waiting on me for something I don't fully understand yet. I need you to trust me, I tell it, out loud, even though I'm not entirely sure the bond even needs spoken words. Just this once. The answer comes as a single image pressed directly into my mind, not words this time, but memory. My mother's face, calm underwater, mouthing something to a much smaller version of Vantheras, 11 years ago, right before the storm took her. The memory doesn't stay still. It pulls me all the way under, back to cold water and splintering wood, and a ship coming apart above us. And for the first time in 11 years, I see the parts I was never allowed to remember on my own. My mother isn't panicking. That's the detail that breaks something in my chest. She's calm, impossibly calm, holding my face in both hands while the ship groans apart above us. And she's talking to something in the dark I couldn't see back then, and can only half see now. A shape too large for the wreckage around us. Patient, ancient, waiting on an answer. Not him, she says, underwater, somehow perfectly clear. Take the debt from me instead. Let him grow up first. Let him have a life before you ask this of him. The shape considers her. I feel it. Considering her, even now, even secondhand, the weight of that decision pressing across 11 years. Then it agrees, and the price gets paid in a single instant. I finally understand. Not a drowning, not an accident, but a trade. Her place in my life folded into the water and sealed away so completely that even grief couldn't find the shape of what actually happened. The last thing I feel from her, right before the memory lets go of me, isn't fear. It's relief. I finally understand what the hollow cantor meant. She didn't drown by accident. She made a trade. Her life, her memory of that trade sealed away from me on purpose, in exchange for keeping the bond dormant until I was old enough to survive what came with waking it. Every year everyone called me delusional. She'd known exactly what was waiting under the water, and she'd bought me 11 years I was never supposed to get. The grief and the rage hit at the same time, and something in the bond answers both at once. A surge of strength pouring through me that has nothing to do with training, and everything to do with finally, completely believing. Vantheras, I say, voice steady for the first time all night. Show them what NULL actually means. The Leviathan's roar this time doesn't just shake the room, it shakes the sealed rift itself, and both devourers stagger back a full step, and even the hollow cantor's calm, finally, visibly, breaks. Vantheras moves like something that finally remembers what it used to be before 300 years of sleep. It catches the nearer devourer mid-lunge and drives it straight through the ruined balcony, timbers and stone exploding outward, buying the exact opening Garrick needs to pull the last trapped students free with his Drake. The second devourer turns on me directly, deciding, correctly, that removing the bond is faster than fighting the Leviathan itself. I don't run. Celine grabs my arm to pull me back, and I stop her with a single word. Wait. The devourer's claw comes down, and instead of dodging, I do the one thing that makes absolutely no sense to anyone watching, including me a few seconds earlier. I step forward, into the strike, and let the bond do what my mother apparently always knew it could. Water rises around me on instinct, not Vantheras' water, mine, cold and ancient and finally, completely awake, and the claw meets a wall of solid black tide half a second before it would have met me. The devourer recoils, confused, and for the first time tonight, the fight isn't Vantheras protecting me, it's both of us protecting everyone else. Garrick, hovering above the wreckage with the last student safely behind him, watches me hold off a creature 3 times my size, with nothing but instinct and a bond 3 weeks in the making, and for once in his life, he looks genuinely, completely speechless. Finish it, Celine shouts. Together, now, before it recovers. Vantheras surges back from the balcony, and this time I don't just watch it move, I move with it. The bond fully open for the first time, and the two of us hit the second devourer at the exact same instant, driving it back through the crack it originally climbed out of, and sealing the break behind it with a wall of water that hardens into something close to black glass. The relief lasts exactly 4 seconds. Then robed figures drop from the shattered balcony in a coordinated line. Not wardens this time, not devourers, but people, blades already drawn, moving with the kind of discipline only real training produces. 6 of them, maybe 7, converging fast on the exposed students still clustered near the collapsed east stair. Choir acolytes, Celine says, already pulling her broken icehawk's last fragment of mist around her hand like a shield. They're not here to finish the warden's job, they're here to grab something before the guards regroup. Grab what? Finn asks, and then answers his own question half a second later, horrified. Oh no, you. They're here for you. He's right. 2 of the acolytes break from the group and come straight at me, ignoring Vantheras entirely in a way that only makes sense if they've already been told exactly how to survive a Leviathan. Stay close, stay low, use the chaos as cover. Vantheras can't reach them without risking the students still trapped between us. I understand, in the space of 1 very bad second, that this is a fight I have to finish myself. The first acolyte's blade comes in fast. I catch the wrist instead of dodging, some instinct from the bond guiding my hand a half second ahead of my own thoughts, and twist hard enough to send the blade skittering across the stone. The second one's already swinging from the other side. Garrick's Stormdrake slams into him before the strike lands, and this time there's no ambiguity about who he's protecting. We're even, Garrick shouts, breathless. After tonight, we're even. We're nowhere close to even, I shout back, disarming the first acolyte fully and shoving him hard into a fallen pillar. But thanks. The remaining acolytes, seeing 2 of their own down and both devourers sealed, don't press the attack. They melt backward into the smoke and wreckage with the same eerie discipline they arrived with, gone before crazed guards can close the distance, leaving nothing behind except 2 disarmed men groaning on the stone, and a growing certainty in my chest that tonight wasn't an isolated attack. It was a data-gathering mission that happened to almost work. Celine grabs my arm before I can chase the retreating acolytes any further, checking the gash on my shoulder with quick, efficient hands that suggest this isn't the first battlefield injury she's ever dealt with. You're bleeding, she says. I noticed. You're also still standing, which, after tonight, I'm going to go ahead and call a win. She ties off the wound with a strip torn from her own sleeve, tight enough to sting. Don't die of something this stupid after surviving 2 devourers. It would be embarrassing. Duly noted. A few of the other first years, the ones who'd laughed loudest 3 weeks ago when the ledger flashed NULL, are staring at me now with an expression I don't have a name for yet. Not mockery, not pity. Something closer to reassessment. Like they're all quietly rewriting 6 years of assumptions in real time. The Voss girl, small and still shaking from her own close call, catches my eye across the wreckage and mouths something that might be thank you. I nod back, because I don't trust my voice not to do something embarrassing if I try to say anything more than that. The room goes silent, except for the crackle of fire and the groaning of settling stone. Everyone left standing in the Sunken Bell is staring at me. The hollow cantor, still on the ruined balcony, straightens his mask with 2 fingers, unbothered by the collapse around him, and looks directly at me one last time. You should thank her, he says. Your mother's sacrifice bought you tonight. It won't buy you the next one. What do you want with me? I ask. Because someone has to. And apparently that someone is me. Nothing, tonight, he says. Tonight was never about taking anything from you, Ashveil. Tonight was about confirming you could survive what's coming. You did. Barely. That's useful information. Useful to who? To everyone who's spent 300 years waiting for the seal to fail properly instead of quietly, he says. You just gave us a very loud, very public deadline. Before Chancellor Cray's remaining guards can reach the stairs, he steps backward into the shadows behind the shattered wall, and simply isn't there anymore. Vantheras lowers its massive head until it's level with me, steam still rising off its scales, and for the first time since the crack first opened, I let myself breathe. Chancellor Cray approaches slowly, robes singed, staring up at Vantheras with an expression somewhere between terror and something closer to greed. Do you have any idea, he says quietly, what you are? Not really, I admit. I just found out my own mother lied to me for 11 years to keep this thing asleep. Ambrose Thorne finally pushes through the crowd of guards, face unreadable, eyes fixed not on me, but on Vantheras, calculating something I don't like the shape of. We'll discuss this privately, he says, voice tight. Tonight? No, I say, and the word comes out steadier than I expect. Tonight? You're going to explain why you sealed the search reports on my mother's death the same week you adopted me. The color drains out of his face fast enough that I know the hollow cantor wasn't lying. Garrick lands beside his father, gaze flicking between the two of us, something new and uncertain in his expression, like 6 years of easy mockery just collapsed as fast as the ceiling did. Celine steps up beside me, ignoring the stunned nobles, the terrified chancellor, the wreckage of an entire ballroom. NULL isn't in the ledgers anymore after tonight, she says, quiet enough that only I can hear it. You just rewrote it in front of 400 witnesses. There's a term for it actually, she adds, quieter still, glancing at the sealed crack like it might be listening. Buried in a genealogy record almost 3 centuries old, an Ashveil bond. I found the phrase months ago and assumed it was a coincidence, some other family with the same name. I don't think it's a coincidence anymore. What does it mean? I don't know yet, she admits. The rest of the entry was redacted before I ever got access to it. Somebody didn't want that page read. Somebody didn't want a lot of things read, apparently, including whatever's locked behind a certain door on the 3rd floor of the Thorne estate. I notice, not for the first time tonight, that Celine won't quite look directly at the sealed crack while she says any of this. A small thing, easy to miss, except I've spent 6 years learning exactly what it looks like when someone's hiding something behind careful composure. I don't ask. Not tonight. There's one more thing I don't mention to her. Not yet. Not with half the council still close enough to listen. The crest on that portrait in my mother's study, the one that wasn't the Ashveil shipping seal, looked, now that I think about it, with a Leviathan's memories still settling behind my own eyes, almost exactly like the pattern scaled across Vantheras' throat. I don't know what that means. I file it away with the rest of it, waiting for whenever I finally work up the nerve to go looking. Great, I mutter. Now I just have to survive being right. Above us, Vantheras shifts, scales catching the firelight, and through the bond I feel it settle into something steadier, older, patient in a way it wasn't 20 minutes ago, like the two of us are finally, fully connected for the first time since a shipwreck, 11 years ago, tried to keep us apart. The kingdom that called me delusional for over a decade just watched a sealed Leviathan answer to my voice and turn back two creatures no living record has ever survived. They're not calling me delusional anymore. Chancellor Cray clears his throat, voice shaking as he addresses what's left of the crowd, trying and failing to sound like a man still in control of the situation. The council will need a full report, he says, on the boy, on the creature, on everything that happened tonight. His name is Vantheras, I say, before anyone else can decide what to call it for me. And I'm not a report. I'm the reason any of you are still standing here. Nobody argues with that. One of the older council members, a stiff woman in soaked funeral black robes I recognize as Lady Priani Voss, steps forward instead, studying Vantheras with the focus of someone doing rapid, silent math. A bond this size hasn't been recorded since before the original sealing, she says. If the histories are accurate, that makes the boy either the greatest asset this kingdom has ever produced, or the single greatest risk to it. He just saved your granddaughter, Celine snaps, nodding toward the Voss girl from earlier, currently being fussed over by two guards near the east stair. Maybe start with asset. Lady Voss doesn't argue. She also doesn't apologize, which tells me exactly how this conversation is going to keep going for the rest of my life. Regardless of the review, she continues, the boy cannot simply return to normal academy life, not with acolytes already circling him within the hour. Then he stays under guard, Cray says quickly, for his protection. For whose protection, Celine mutters, low enough that only I catch it, is the actual question nobody in this room is going to ask out loud. Ambrose says nothing through any of it, which somehow feels louder than if he'd argued. I watch him do the math I already recognize from 6 years of living in his house, weighing cost against value, liability against leverage, deciding, in real time, exactly how useful a stepson with a Leviathan might turn out to be. I don't like the answer he seems to be landing on. A few of the surviving students laugh at that, sharp and short, half hysteria and half genuine agreement, and I catch the exact moment Garrick's expression shifts from stunned to something more complicated. Pride, maybe, or the beginning of it, mixed with something that looks almost like guilt. 6 years, he says quietly, low enough that only I can hear it. 6 years I called you delusional, and you were the strongest person in every single room I ever put you in. Little late, I say. Yeah, he agrees, working on it. It's not an apology. It's not enough of one. Not yet. Not after 6 years of it. But it's the first honest thing Garrick Thorne has ever said to me, and something about the wreckage around us makes it land harder than it should. Cray raises his voice again, addressing the surviving crowd directly. Tonight's events will be classified pending council review, he announces. Anyone who speaks to outside press about the creature, about the boy, about any of it, answers directly to the crown. 400 witnesses, a ballroom half in ruins, and somehow, Solmir's council still thinks silence is a strategy that's going to work this time. Ambrose Thorne's jaw tightens, already retreating into the careful, political silence he uses whenever a conversation stops going his way. And I understand, watching him, that whatever answers he owes me about my mother, I'm not getting them tonight, and maybe not without a fight of my own. Finn appears at my side, pale but grinning in the shaky, adrenaline-soaked way people grin right after they survive something they shouldn't have. You do know, he says, that we are never, ever going to be treated normally again. Speak for yourself, I say. I was never treated normally to begin with. Fair, Finn admits. Still, I'd like it on record that I believed you before it was cool. You literally just found out 15 minutes ago that giant sea monsters are real. Details, he says. I'm choosing to remember it more heroically when I tell people. Vantheras exhales, a low sound like tide pulling back from shore, and settles its enormous head just close enough to rest against my shoulder. Careful, deliberate, protective in a way that has nothing left to do with instinct, and everything to do with choice. For just a second, alone inside the bond, even with a dozen people still watching, I ask it the question I haven't had the nerve to ask out loud. What did tonight cost me? The answer isn't words. It's a feeling, distant and honest, like something being carefully, deliberately withheld rather than denied. Not nothing, just not yet. I don't push. Some debts apparently run in the family. Slowly, the enormous bulk of it begins to recede, not vanishing, not leaving, just folding smaller, scales dimming from starless black to something closer to deep harbor water, until what's left standing beside me is still massive, still unmistakably a Leviathan, but small enough to fit through a doorway instead of tearing through a ceiling. I don't know if that's a limit of the bond or a mercy Vantheras is choosing on its own. I decide I'd rather not ask which, not tonight. Far above the wreckage, unseen by anyone else in the ruined hall, a single black feather drifts down from the shattered ceiling and lands at my feet. The exact same mark, I'll later learn, that the hollow cantor leaves behind every single time he walks away from a fight he intended to lose. This wasn't a defeat for him. It was a test, and I just showed him exactly what he needed to see. By morning, every noble house in Solmere would know exactly what happened inside the Sunken Bell tonight. By tomorrow night, half of them would already be deciding whether I was worth allying with or worth eliminating before I became a problem too large to control. I didn't know any of that yet, standing in the wreckage with blood drying on my shoulder and a Leviathan's head resting against mine. I just knew the silence I'd lived inside for 11 years was finally, permanently over. Somewhere beneath the sealed rift, deep in the part of the drowned deep no record has ever mapped, something even older than Vantheras stirs awake for the first time in 300 years, disturbed by a bond it thought had been buried for good. I don't know that yet. Standing there in the wreckage with Celine, Finn, a stunned Garrick, and a Leviathan that finally, truly knows my name, all I know is this. The voice I spent 11 years insisting was real, just saved every single person in this room. And whatever the hollow cantor is planning next, my mother didn't die keeping this secret for nothing. She was buying me time to be ready. I intend to use every second of it. If you want to see what happens when the whole kingdom finds out exactly what Dorian Ashveil really is, smash that like button. Let's hit 800 likes for Chapter 2.